Welcome back. This is the third in our short series on animating elements in your web page. And this time we're going to deal with actual CSS animations, which are a little bit different, but also part of or made up of transitions and transforms underneath. So to review, I'll show this slide from the other lecture. Um, Transitions allow for property changes. Transforms allow for movement. Animations combine those and add other features that allow us to do a little bit more with certain aspects of our design. They have their whole like it's an entirely separate way of constructing movement than with transitions and transforms, and you can still use the transitions and transforms as part of the animation. I definitely recommend exploring the W3 Schools page on animations. So first, let's take a look at the syntax, because I think in this case, it's actually better to see this first and then look at the examples so that we might be able to see better what's going on. So we've got an animated div here. That's our class that we've defined. And the two major important parts here are the name of the animation. It can be whatever you want to call it. It doesn't have to be animation. It can be Fred or dog or any other word in the English language or not English languages. The keyframes block then uses whatever name you specified for the animation to define what's going to happen during the animation. So in this case, we have a fade that's happening here of some kind, so that it's going to fade from black to white. That's really what we can tell from this. And then if we break down that first block a bit, we'll get a better sense of how this works. All right, so the animation property has its has its own internal syntax, which you can tell. This is just like how a transition has things that you can do or not do within it. These are the same things, but for animations specifically. So we've got the name, which we've already talked about. It can be anything. That's in that baby blue color. The duration, so this is again similar. Those two are required. The animation has to have some way to refer to it, and it has to have duration. The timing function is a good idea to have with animations because they won't run properly without some kind of timing function. They'll be really strange. And then this 2-second is supposed to be green. I missed that. The delay is similar to the transition delay. It just once it's triggered, it will wait 2 seconds before it does anything in this case. And then the animation iteration count is like how many times do you want it to repeat? If you want it to do the thing once, you say 1. If you want it to do it twice, you say 2. If you want it to do it infinitely, you can use the word infinite, and that will just make it so that it runs without stopping. I'll show you another thing that you can add to this list that might help you a bit as we get to the examples. But for now, let's go look at the keyframes block. Okay, so this is that same original block that we saw on a few slides ago. So that top line, you have to have that at keyframes identifier that helps that tells us what we're doing, and I'm not going to explain what keyframes means or like what its kind of underlying logic is, but but it basically means that like you're entering a series of steps or key frames, like the frames at which transition occurs. So like whatever amount of time you've specified, in this case, I think it was, I can't remember, it was a few seconds. It's going to go from the original or the origin of the trigger. So in this case, it's at 0%, right, is when the thing starts changing, and it's going to stop changing at 100%. And so in this case, we're changing the background from black to white, and we're changing the color of the text from white to black. You can also add more steps in between. So in this case, I only added one extra step, but I'm now changing the color of the text from black to gray to white over the course of 3 steps. So it'll make a transition at 0%, make a transition at 50, and make a transition at 100, but it makes those linearly, because that's the easing function that we, or yeah, that's the function that we specified for its timing. All right, so let's look at some examples that I have constructed. So here we've got 4 different squares, and each one is doing a different thing. So like there's no trigger for this. This means that they're triggered on load. I didn't put any hover or pseudo class in to make that happen. It just changes when it immediately starts changing when you load the page. So the squares are defined similarly to the other ones that we've seen. This has a transition with a transform on it, but that doesn't get called because there's no transmission here later. That's from the last slide. I'm just copying these or forking them every time I make a new one, which is good, but I should probably remove lines like that so they don't do unexpected things. So after this is where we have our animations defined. So in this first one, I'm going to do the black to white change. I'm going to do it a little differently than I had on the other page. So what's going to happen here is that it'll have kind of a long, it'll have a 5% of the time, or in this case, what do we have, 20 seconds? So 2 seconds of that will be spent, no, sorry, 1 second of that will be spent on like it'll hold on black for the background, and then 1 second will hold on white. I didn't change the color of the text, but I could have. I would just do opposite what I have here, and then I put a gray step right in the middle. So if you look over here at our example, you can see it's fading into black, and it'll stop, hold on black so you can't see the text, and then it comes back and fades back up all the way to white. Now I'm doing this, I'm using linear for this so that it doesn't jump around, or I want it to feel like it's smooth. So all of these examples use smooth, but you could use a different timing function here. You could use steps. You can also emulate steps by changing the percentage of action in the keyframes. And then I used this. I used alternate here. And so what that is doing is when it hits the end of the animation, instead of replaying it from the beginning, it plays it backward. And it will do that infinitely. So it'll go from the beginning to the end, to the beginning, to the end, to the beginning, to the end forever. There are other things that you can specify here. Forward will just push it all the way to the end, and we'll see how that works in a second. This second one we have, I've got a transition happening through color. So it goes from black to white, but through the color red. And I added a couple of extra steps because I wanted it to do that not just smoothly, but also I wanted it to kind of transition through other colors that would complement. So here I have black as the first color for the background, and then I have like midnight blue, red tomato, which is kind of an orangey pinkish red, and then white. So you can look at the animation, see when it starts, it's on completely black. It moves to blue through red and all the way to white. These are really long, also, just mostly so that you can see what they're doing and watch it kind of broken down and slower. I definitely, I've said this in every lecture, but like I recommend playing with this on CodePen if you want to use animations, because it's a really there are lots of bits to manipulate here, and the easiest way to figure out what you want is to just try it. All right, so this one is much more complicated than the others, it looks like, but it really just means that I've added a whole bunch more steps. So I wanted to make like a spectrum rainbow, and I wanted the animation to move through it. So that's exactly what I've done. I started it and ended it on the same color so that it will look like it's moving continuously. If I put different colors here, there would be a jump at the end. So that's something to think about. If you want it to loop, that means, and which means also having the effect of moving from this color to this color, the same way that the others do. You have to think about how to move into and out of that, because otherwise it just stops and restarts. So this one is actually going all the way through. So you can see here, I used forwards. It's linear. It's moving at 5 seconds, and then the iteration count is infinite. I could have put infinite up here too. The forwards allows it to go from the beginning to the end and then through to the next beginning. But it doesn't really have a break in between. Like if you do this normally, there will be a little bit of a break. This one doesn't have any break, so it keeps the movement continuous. So let's take a look at this and see how it worked. It works pretty well. The trick of having the beginning and the end the same, I'm really pleased with how that turned out. That actually took me a bit of trial and error to figure out. So initially I had just a list of colors, and I ran through all of them, and I wasn't pleased that it wasn't looking like it was looping, and I was trying to figure out how do you make it loop, because I know I've seen this before, and then it dawned on me. So again, as you explore these things, it will be useful to just try stuff and see what works and what doesn't. So in this last one, I'm applying a filter, which is another tool that you can use for animation and for transition and transform. You can make things, you can use a filter to make things look a different way, like without other styles. So in this case, I'm applying both a blur and an opacity filter. So the blur obviously blurs from the edges of things that many pixels away. So it's blurring about 5 pixels, and then opacity in this case is going to make it get thinner or less. You'll be able to quote see through it, like it would look like it's transparent, and it would be transparent on screen. So let's look at this. So the start, or its origin point is at 0 blur, 100% opacity, and then it moves all the way through to very blurry, and then all the way back. And so this is a really limited set of examples. Like I wanted to give you kind of a, I don't know, like a good smattering of things that you could do, but there's so many different ways that you can use animations. Again, be judicious. You don't want them to be, you don't want it to be something that's in the way of your content or in the way of user interaction or accessibility, but these are things that can also be used to enhance accessibility. So if there's an element on screen that you want to particularly focus on and you want to make everything else out of focus, you can blur it. You can apply a filter and make it blurry and dimmer, or blurry and opaque, so that then the element that you're focused on, the one that you want to focus on, is the one that you can actually see clearly. That's a really easy way to push a person's attention to a specific thing, or to pull it away from something. Um, and again, for the purpose of accessibility, like accessibility is really complex, and so sometimes it means pushing someone or taking someone along a path that you understand as the designer, but that may not be so intuitive. And one of the ways that you can do this is by either like blurring out or making clear the thing that they're supposed the person interacting is supposed to do next. Or you can use this as part of a tutorial. So you can blur the background or blur the whole screen except for one element and a like a tooltip or something like that. These are all things that are very accessible to you if you get a little practice with using them. So that's the end of this series. The next little series that I'm going to do, which you're not going to have a quiz over or have to do anything really with except watch because it might be useful if you want to. We're going to talk about wireframing and kind of low-fi, low-fidelity mock-ups of things, because I find that it's really useful. And I mentioned this maybe in the first time I lectured your class in person. I mentioned that it's really good to just sort of like sketch up what you're eventually going to do, so that then you can see. In that case, I think it related to media queries. You could see what each media query was going to mean, and what shapes it would take. So this is we'll look into the why and how of doing wireframes in another 2-part lecture that should be pretty short. And as always, I would recommend looking through these resources and any others that you might find. Please feel free to post them to Piazza. That is all for now, and I will see you next time.